seen the sunshine, I'm doing my time to pay for my sin. I count the cost, but all is lost if heaven just won't let me in. Hope was gone and freedom far, but then I met Jesus behind bars.
Jesus said, I am the truth, the way, and the light. And also, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Thanks for listening to Jesus Behind Bars. And now, here's Philip Hicks.
Chapter 1. Hello everybody, my name is Philip Hicks with Jesus Behind Bars Prison Ministry, and nowadays folks call me the mild man. But I haven't always been the mild man, because years ago I was known as Philip Wildman Hicks as I partied to the extreme in Aspen, Colorado, along with Hunter S. Thompson, who wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, with Jimmy Buffett and Robin Williams. Robin was our comedian at a club that I worked in Aspen, along with my best friend Ed Hoban from Marin County, California. And we were in the cabaret one night doing a little intermission break for all our fans, and as Robin did the funny, and we're out there pouring drinks, and then suddenly people started shouting, "Fire! We want some fire!" Ed picked up his lighter, I did mine. We put a shot of 151 rum in our mouths and blew the rum through the flames, just skyrocketing across overhead. Suddenly, the rum dripped down my chin onto my Nick shirt and caught me on fire. Yes, you might say I was a man on fire. Suddenly, people started screaming and all, thinking it's part of the act. I had the presence of mind to duck my upper body into the well where you wash the dishes or glasses and extinguish them. I got third-degree burns on my chin, and they're all clapping and throwing money our way. Yes, I was a man on fire. Down in Fort Lauderdale, of course, that lifestyle could only last so long when I stupidly, naively volunteered to help a guy recover some stolen drug money. The first chapter of this book, The Cross and the 357 Magnum, has you climbing down a rope with me. Yes, I was a man on the end of my rope.
The Cross and the 357 Magnum, written and read by Philip T. Hicks. Chapter 1. 2 Steps Back. Warm raindrops splashed against my face as we lowered the coarse rope over the roof's edge. From the top of a Fort Lauderdale apartment building, my eyes nervously searched the parking lot 5 stories below, and I silently prayed I wouldn't spot any security guards coming by on patrol. My partner Tom and I were dressed completely in black, blending perfectly with our starless sky backdrop. I tried to remain calm, but my mind was doing flip-flops. After snorting much more cocaine than usual that afternoon and evening, I had attempted to come down by toking on a joint of Colombian Gold, a premium form of marijuana. Instead of bringing me down, the stuff just made me paranoid. "Look down there," I yelled. "There's a security guard. He's looking up here." "Shh, hold it down," whispered Tom. "That's just someone who got out of that car. They'd have to have bionic eyesight to see us." It was time to descend to the now darkened apartment 3 stories below, whose occupants had already departed. Before gaining access to this wealthy gated community, Tom and I had lain in wait in a grassy field adjacent to the complex. With the help of a pair of military binoculars purchased earlier at a local Army surplus store, we had monitored the movement of the couple who had lived in the apartment and watched as the lights went out. They finally walked across the parking lot, entered their car, and drove away. As soon as the patrolling security guard was out of sight, we made our move, successfully scaling a chain-link fence that surrounded the complex, then crawling to the edge of the parking lot. Using the parked cars for cover, we slowly maneuvered our way to the building, boldly taking the elevator to the 5th floor before climbing a ladder to the roof. Thankfully, no one crossed our path. Tom had brought along a 40-foot-long rope. After tying one end around an air-conditioned vent, he slowly lowered the other end over the edge of the roof. I insisted on being the one to scale the building, then I took a deep breath before easing over the edge. No problem, I thought to myself. I'd seen this done on detective shows many times before. Perspiration trickled down my face as I fiercely gripped the rope. I had no trouble as I inched past the 5th floor on my way to the 3rd floor balcony. The relative ease of my progress temporarily erased my fears until I suddenly froze in terror. My heart raced while my breath stood still. There before me, less than 6 short feet away, stood a woman on her 4th floor balcony, silently smoking a cigarette as she gazed into the night. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating, and a million thoughts raced through my mind. Was I losing it? How long had she been there? Had she walked out while I was climbing down? How could I have been so blind? What was I going to do? "Oh, God," I whispered, "don't let her see me." Scenes of my life flashed vividly before me, and I wondered how I could have been so reckless as to have volunteered to participate in this ridiculous escapade. I had come to Florida to enjoy a fun-filled vacation, intending to return home to Aspen, Colorado in 2 weeks. During the 3 years that I had lived in Aspen, I made friends with a guy named Al Bishop. Whenever Al visited Aspen, he came with lots of cash, and he didn't hesitate to spend it freely. I introduced Al to many people, including Robin Williams, a young comedian from California. Al told me he kept a beachside apartment in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which was available to me if I ever traveled south. When I arrived in Florida, I discovered that Tom, another friend of Al's, was using the apartment, and we became short-term roommates. While partying with Tom, I learned that he too was 29 years old and that we had much in common. While I was in Florida to party, though, he was here on business, some very risky business, involving a man named John. According to Tom, John had ripped off some $30,000 in a drug deal that had gone sour 6 months earlier. He had returned to Florida to recover that loss. "Can you run that by me again?" I excitedly questioned Tom after he told me his story. "So what happened? What did you do?" "Hold on," replied Tom. "I'm getting there. What do you think I did? I mean, it was his apartment, and all he had to do was call the cops and report a burglar was in his place. What was I going to do? Call the cops and tell them this guy ripped off my drugs? Hell no. I ran out of there, drove to the airport, and flew back to Tennessee." And now, 6 months later, Tom had returned to the scene, or should I say above the scene, as he was now 3 stories above me while I dangled helplessly on a rope, about to be spotted by the woman who stood 6 feet away. I was about to freak out. "Don't turn this way, lady," I half prayed, half whispered. "Go back inside, lady." What seemed like an eternity later, the woman turned from the rail, paused first to toss her cigarette butt into the night before going back inside her apartment. By some miracle, she hadn't spotted me. I then probably set a speed record for rappelling down a building, as I soon found myself safely on the 3rd-floor balcony. I used a small pry bar to pop open the sliding glass door as Tom pulled the rope back up. He then came down the emergency ladder to the 3rd-floor stairwell en route to the front door of the apartment, where I waited. After hearing the light tapping on the door, I let Tom in, and we began ransacking the apartment. Following an intense search, I found a big roll of $20 bills in a suit coat pocket. My find totaled $5,000. "Wow, I ain't believing this," I said to myself. I dashed into the other room. "Tom," I shouted, "look at this." "This ain't enough," whispered Tom as he thumbed through the bills. "Keep looking." We continued our frantic search for additional cash, looking through every drawer and cupboard we could find. I came across a box of bullets, but otherwise we came up empty-handed. Tom decided we'd have to wait on John to return home, then force him to come up with the remaining 25 grand. That was when my true colors began to surface, and they were all yellow. While Tom began looking through a hall closet, I went into the kitchen. I couldn't find anything of value in the cupboards, but out of curiosity, I opened the refrigerator. My eyes lit up when I spotted a bottle of wine. "All right," I said as I examined the label. I could tell it was expensive. Regardless, I figured it was a good way to get some instant courage. I grabbed the corkscrew and worked on opening the bottle. Pow! The cork popped out, and I jumped, spewing wine all over the cabinet drawers. Startled by the noise, Tom ran into the kitchen. "What in blazes was that?" he demanded. He took one look at me, shook his head disgustedly, and walked out. I was soon sitting in the hallway, sipping expensive wine from one of the fancy crystal wine glasses I'd found. The more I drank, the more I had to get up and use the bathroom. Before long, the commode was filled with cigarette butts floating in the now yellow water. I was afraid to flush it for fear a neighbor might hear and know someone was there. "Here," said Tom. My eyes again lit up as he handed me a gun the size of a small cannon. "I found this .357 Magnum in the bedside table. You may need it. This dude could be armed," he added. Well, now, I knew I had done a number of things wrong in my life, and playing cat burglar surely wasn't going to win me any stars in the Saints Hall of Fame, but I didn't want any part of killing anyone. I hadn't signed on for that. All he said we'd have to do was go into the apartment and the dough would be there. He didn't say anything about this before. My stomach turned into a knot. Why had I ever said yes to this crap? The cold metal of the gun sent chills down my spine. I quickly laid it aside and resumed my drinking, while Tom stationed himself beside a bedroom window, watching for John's return. I heard a noise at the front door. Moments later, it swung open to reveal a giant of a man. John had finally arrived. As our eyes met, I don't know who was more surprised, but there was no doubt who was more afraid. Jumping up, I turned to run away, moving toward the small bedroom where Tom was hiding. As I charged through the door, I collided with Tom, who was coming out at the same time. This all took place in an instant, and it probably resembled an episode of the Three Stooges. Tom now stood between John and me. John's female companion stepped into the apartment and screamed. Tom headed toward her while John dashed into the master bedroom. Then I grabbed the gun and followed John. He was leaning over his bedside table, no doubt looking for the gun I now held in my shaking hand. "All right," I shouted. "Turn around and raise your hands above your head." I fully expected him to turn around, raise his hands, and give up, just like they do on television. However, he must have forgotten the script as he charged me. I was momentarily dazed as I watched John knock the gun from my outstretched hand, but I quickly came to my senses and realized there'd be no more compromise. This was for real. It would be him or me. We both reached for the Magnum. Unfortunately, I came up on the short end of the deal, and yet from somewhere I drew strength I'd never before experienced, and I held my own. I wrestled with this giant of a man over the large gun he now held. As we grappled, the gun went off. It fired once, twice, and the third shot made contact with my right leg. The bullet shattered my thigh bone, sending me crashing onto the floor. For some reason, I pretended I was dead. I lay motionless in a pool of blood, frozen in a state of shock. Since the only light came through the doorway of the living room, my attacker didn't know where I'd been hit, and he probably thought I was dead. John stepped to the doorway, and a gun battle began between him and Tom, who was somewhere in the front of the apartment. The fact that Tom even had a gun was still a shock to me. As the roar of their guns filled the air, I tried to stand, but I fell right back, grimacing in pain as my leg hit the floor. Realizing I was still alive, John quickly returned to my side, leaned down, placed the Magnum to the side of my head, and fired. All I heard were two loud clicks. "Damn," he muttered before throwing the empty gun onto the carpet. He then ran out. I later learned he caught two .44 Magnum slugs as he ran past Tom. He was hit in the back and in the arm, but strangely, he didn't die. In fact, he kept going. Tom locked the door and ran to my side, saying, "Come on, let's go." "I can't go anywhere," I groaned. "I've been hit, and I need a doctor. Bad. Don't worry, I'm not going to snitch on you. Take off." And he did. To this day, I don't know how Tom reached the ground uninjured as he dropped over the balcony. Then again, maybe he was. No matter, because the cops never found him, and I never again saw or heard from Tom. After Tom split, I dragged myself into the bathroom. I pulled myself up to the sink to get a drink. I was in tremendous pain. I lowered myself back to the floor and began crawling out of the bathroom. As I tried to turn sideways to drag my leg through, I got stuck. "Oh!" I groaned. I tried to maneuver my body through the narrow doorway, and my leg got jammed. The pain was unbearable, and now I couldn't move forward or backward. I remembered something I heard a preacher man say years before. My folks used to make me go to church. I didn't dig the scene, but the ladies were awesome. Anyway, this preacher was describing the devil and how he operates. "Satan paints a real simple picture in his efforts to lead people astray," began Brother Hartman. "Then when they go for the bait and get pulled under, it's all over." Most definitely, at that time of my life, I knew very little about the devil and how he worked. In fact, anything I knew about the man upstairs, good and evil and all that, was purely head knowledge. The words I once heard would come back to me. A mere 9 inches separates a person from hell and heaven. That is, enjoying a heart relationship with Jesus versus head knowledge or mental assent. Nevertheless, there was some kind of battle going on inside of me. It was due to much, much more than the drugs I had taken. One side of me was saying it's time to leave, while the other side reminded, "You don't want to be called a chicken, do you?" My thoughts returned to my present situation when I heard voices in the next apartment and a pounding on the wall. Later, I learned the entire apartment complex was crawling with cops, one of which was now talking to me through the wall. Of course, he didn't know who I was, if I lived there or what. "Is anybody in there?" "Hello," said a gruff voice. "Yes," I screamed, "and I need help." "Open the door," he demanded. "I can't," I yelled. "I've been shot, and I can't move. Help me. My leg hurts something awful. Help me, please." The splintering of the wood as they battered down the door was echoed in the pain shooting through my leg, the shouting of instructions, the hammering, and the fear that now caused my gut to knot up even worse. "Oh, God," I screamed. "Help me." "All right, throw out your gun," yelled a voice from the doorway of the bedroom. "I don't have a gun. I'm hurt. I need help, please," I cried. "Come out with your hands above your head," ordered another voice. "I can't. I've been shot in the leg, and I'm stuck in the doorway," I yelled back. Leaning over as far as I could stand it, I turned my head back toward the direction of the voices. There stood 3 men. One was pointing what looked like a sawed-off shotgun at me, and the other 2 leveled their pistols in my direction. "Are you alone?" one questioned as he edged closer. "Yes," I groaned, before collapsing on my side. At this point, I could care less about the guns. I needed a doctor. I felt sure I was going to bleed to death. Surely, I thought, I'd wake up any second and this horrendous nightmare would come to an end. It didn't. "We need medical assistance in here. Got a man down," said one of the officers into his walkie-talkie. 2 paramedics entered the room. They checked my vital signs and slowly placed me on a stretcher. "Easy now," he said to me. "We'll have you out of here in no time." Well, at least that's what he thought. As we headed down the hallway to the elevator, dozens of glaring people lined the hallway. I felt so dirty, so ashamed. Halfway into the elevator, the medics discovered the stretcher was too long to fit. "Oh, no," complained one cop. "Can you take him off that damn thing till we get him downstairs?" he asked. "No way. That leg's been moved enough already." "Son of a bitch," muttered one cop to another. "All right, then. There's only one thing we can do. Lieutenant," he spoke into his walkie-talkie, "we're going to need the hook and ladder truck. Stretcher's too big for the elevator. Subject will have to be lowered over the edge." The pain was excruciating as I was lowered over the balcony. Each time the cable stopped with a sudden jolt, I moaned, "Oh!" And yet I was just glad to get away from the eyes of my accusers, who now lined the apartment balconies to watch the show. Following a short ambulance ride, the emergency doors of a nearby hospital swung wide open as they wheeled me inside. I was placed in a brightly lit hallway where I waited to be seen by a physician. The next thing that happened almost blew my mind. Who did they wheel in and place on the stretcher right beside me but Big John, the guy who had just tried to blow out my brains? And my still intact brain was running wild. I thought sure he was about to finish me off. My paranoia was intense. I turned my head away from him and faced the wall. For a moment, I thought my teeth were chattering because the air conditioning was so cold. But I knew it was because I was afraid of the guy now lying beside me. The glass doors opened a few feet away, and a tall man in a suit pointed toward me and said, "What in hell is that guy doing beside the other one?" I quickly realized he was a police officer. He looked to a nearby nurse and asked, "Where can we move this fellow?" The nurse helped the officer push my stretcher into a side room. 2 young detectives came in, and the older, nicer officer left the room. One of the detectives read me my Miranda rights. I must have blown their minds when I naively waived my rights, then proceeded to give them a full confession on tape. Of course, my admission of guilt was full of lies, sufficient to cover Tom's tracks. And yet, what did it matter to them? As far as they were concerned, they had their bird. Deep down, I knew I hadn't been coerced into taking part in this crime. I had chosen my path, so why not take the rap myself? And on top of all that, there's that unwritten code among criminals: thou shalt not snitch. Following my interrogation, I was surprised when both cops walked out, leaving me alone. An older nurse soon walked in with a clipboard and said, "Since you're a transient and have no insurance, we won't be able to treat or admit you here. This is a private hospital. They're going to take you somewhere else." So I was taken by ambulance to Broward General Medical Center in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. There I was placed in traction in a 5-bed ward on the 3rd floor. Thankfully, I was quickly medicated, and maybe it was my imagination, but it sure seemed like the nurse used more force than necessary when jabbing the syringe into my bottom. placed me in traction, my pants had to be cut off. This left me completely without clothes. I had no money, no family nearby, no friends, not even nearby acquaintances. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone, except for the one-on-one 24-hour guard, and he did nothing to help my loneliness. He probably had his own family at home. Besides, he was just there because he was working. I was afraid. I was ashamed and angry. I was depressed, paranoid, and confused. I continually pondered how I could have been so stupid to get caught up in something like this and to have begun hanging out with these types of people. The heaviest thing on my mind was my dear parents back in Memphis and how hurt they would be when they found out. My wonderful parents had worked so hard to provide my two brothers and me with things they could never afford when they were growing up, things even some of our friends never enjoyed. I seldom thought about my parents during my fast days of high living in Aspen, but now I did, and I didn't want their tender hearts to break. I wanted desperately to crawl into a deep, dark hole and disappear. I wanted to die. For me, life had ended. To me, there was no hope for tomorrow. Reflections on Chapter 1. It's been said that people cry out to God while in foxholes and prisons. Psalms 107, 9-12 paints a vivid picture of why it often takes a person to get knocked down before he or she will look up. For he satisfies the thirsty soul, and the hungry soul he's filled with what is good. There were those who dwelt in darkness, in the shadow of death, prisoners in misery and chains, because they had rebelled against the words of God and rejected the counsel of the Most High. Therefore he humbled their hearts with labor. They stumbled, and there was none to help. I had spent 29 years in rebellion, and when I was rebelling against my parents and the law, I was actually rebelling against God, whose word reminds us, pride comes before a fall, and a haughty spirit before stumbling. Proverbs 16:18.
Thank you for watching chapter number 1 of the Cross in the 357 Magnum. And it's my honor now to send you out with a prayer. Father God, I just thank you for everyone watching this episode or listening to it. And I pray you would overwhelm their hearts with your loving kindness. Just break in, God. Just break in, Lord, and reveal yourself to them. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Are you looking for a life-changing story that will inspire, provoke, encourage, and awaken the hearts of your prodigal sons and daughters? Look no further. The Cross and the 357 Magnum is available at www.JesusBehindBars.com. This amazing page-turner is a faith builder for believers and a lightning rod for those who are in search of their true identity. Go to www.JesusBehindBars.com today and help send author missionary Philip Hicks back to prison.